So we've got an extra guest in the studio today. We've got Dale Johnson, who's our resident expert on VAR, Champions League draws, everything that involves numbers and data and not nerdish issues, Dale, but you know what I mean, that kind of thing.
I know exactly what you mean, yeah.
And we're here to discuss the Champions League draw on Thursday.
This season sees massive changes to the Champions League. In addition to the revamped anthem, the group stage and the balls in the draw for it are now gone. In its place is an expanded 36-team tournament and a supercomputer to replace the ex-pros fumbling with the balls.
Dale's piece is live now on ESPN.com, I think, with all the changes listed. Obviously, you're the expert. What are the main changes? What are the main things that fans are going to need to look out for?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's going to be really strange is having a draw where teams aren't drawn into groups, which creates 2 fixtures home and away for each team. It's now going to be a case of drawing fixtures, basically, the 8 teams that teams are going to play. So there are going to be the 4 pots, as there is always been, but now you'll get 2 teams from each pot to create the fixtures. Now, we're not going to find out where you're going to be playing the teams until the Saturday, because they're going to have to put that up against the Europa League. And then you're going to have to get used to the fact that this is just one big 36-team league where we're not really going to know what's going to happen until January, because the tournament's been extended right into the winter. So it's going to be really interesting to see just how competitive it really is going to be. And when we do get right to the end, whether teams really care about where they're going to finish in the league table.
We were at a briefing with UEFA at the end of last season. They were telling us about how it's going to work, and I think only 8 teams get knocked out of it's not the group stage, the initial stage. So on the final match day, because a team in 24th position could still qualify for the latter stages by virtue of the way the competition works it out. I think it's between 9 and 24, isn't it? They go into a playoff round in the spring. Yeah, so the top 8 go direct to the round of 16, which is played in March. Then 9 to 24 go into the knockout playoff phase, which is played in February, and then the bottom 12, so 25 to 36, are knocked out straight away. And in the article that I've done this week, it mocks out exactly what could happen on that final match day. That's when you have 18 matches all being played simultaneously. And we know how crazy the Premier League can be when you have 10 games being played at the same time. But this is 18, and of course, with this not being a domestic season, it's only 24 points available. There's far more swings can happen, and in the mock we did for that final match day, we had teams moving 5 positions from 13th to 8th. You had a team that was in 29th moving up into the playoffs. There can be some real big changes, so it is going to be an interesting final match day. But like I say, this is all dependent on whether teams care whether they finish 12th, 13th, 14th, 17th or 18th. And one thing to stress as well, I think, let's say you're an Aston Villa fan, you've been waiting to get back in the Champions League European Cup for 40 years, and you want to play Real Madrid, and you get drawn against Real Madrid. Well, you might not play Real Madrid in Madrid. You basically play each team once. So if you're looking forward to playing these massive teams at home and maybe going away, it's one or the other, which I guess is a shame for football fans who want to see their team play home and away against the big teams. Yeah,
I mean, people say that the pots don't mean anything anymore, when in essence they don't, because, for instance, it used to be a benefit to be in pot 1, because that meant you would not play any of the strongest teams in the group stage, whereas now every team in pot 1 will play 2 teams from pot 1. But obviously within each of these pots there is varying strength. Let's take pot 2, which Arsenal are in, Atletico Madrid. Now you could draw Arsenal or Atletico Madrid, but pot 2 also has 2 much weaker teams in Shakhtar Donetsk and Club Brugge. So what you really want from that group is to be drawing one of those 2, preferably at home, rather than getting your Arsenal, your Atletico Madrid away. So the pots do have lower significance, but it really is important, like you say, who you get home and who you get away, which is going to be drawn by computer. I think that's an important point, which James mentioned, is the fact that it used to be manual. We used to see everything happen. All 32 teams would be drawn out into their position in the group. But now, all that will happen is you'll have the ex-player on stage, he'll go to pot 1, he'll draw Liverpool, and then a computer will, because it's so complicated.
For the sake of clarity to people who think this is a bit iffy because we're not seeing what's happening, it would take 1,296 different balls for the draw to be done in the old-fashioned way. So let's and that's just for the teams alone. You've then got to factor in the home and away aspect, and the fact that everyone's going to get one of each. So you couldn't do it that manually, because it would start to get really complicated in terms of what options are still available for those home and away situations.
It'll be interesting to see how the managers address that, because obviously in the old format, home and away, you play everyone twice. It's kind of a set thing. But if you've got big games away from home, or perceived big games away from home, and or maybe the big games at home, you've got perceived weaker teams away from home. There'll be some managers who call that into question. There's no doubt. They pay attention to all that. They plan seasons weeks and weeks in advance, and these little period. I know some fans will say, well, you have to, you play the games that you're given, and it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. It does matter to managers.
Well, if you're playing away games in Turkey and in Greece and maybe in Eastern Europe rather than playing in France and in Belgium, it does make a difference on travelling. And managers, like you say, they're all over that. They have to work out what is the best for them. But managers more than anything, to be fair, don't they?
Well, there's also the case of rotation. You habitually would play your strongest team at the start of the group stage, and then hopefully you're through after 4 matches and you can rotate and play the kids and get some rest into some players. But clearly managers are going to have to approach that differently, and it's going to be much more fixture dependent. And I was looking this morning actually about I always think a sort of underestimated aspect of the fixture list is what you've got after a Champions League game. And Arsenal have actually got a really tough group before the group's even been drawn, because the first Champions League game they play, they go to Spurs the weekend before, and then they go to Man City the weekend after. I mean, that is a baptism of fire for them in the Champions League this season. They're obviously praying for an easy game at home or a lesser ranked team at home. They've got Liverpool at home after the third Champions League game, and then the fourth Champions League game they're away to Newcastle and then away to Chelsea either side of that. So that's another massive week, all again before Christmas. Match day 5 they're away at West Ham, then they've got Man United at home, and then the final group stage game they play that, and then they've got Man City at home the following weekend. So you're already looking, if you're Mikel Arteta, you're looking at that, you're thinking we're in the lap of the gods here more than ever for this draw, given all the permutations, given the fact that we don't play everyone home and away, and given the fact that it's a league structure that no one quite knows where the tipping point is going to be for qualification. There are more unknowns about this than we've probably ever known in the Champions League.
That's what the managers will dislike, the unknown element of it. If you go through a system for 21 years since with any significant changes to the draw, you kind of know what you're going to get. Managers hate, we all know the managers that we cover week in, week out, the one thing they want is control. And if there's a massive unknown, it's like you said there, like the old saying was that if you get 9 points from your first 3 games in the Champions League group, you're there or thereabouts, aren't you? You're through. I'm not really sure that people are going to really know what kind of points threshold you're going to need. I mean, to me, it looks around 16 points, but you just don't know, do you? That
is the whole point of this. Rather than have the Champions League group stage dead after 3 or 4 group games, the idea is that it kind of spins out right to the end. I mean, there will be teams that win every game, but the Champions League group stage, as much as we all love it, it had become a bit predictable. There's certain groups you just knew that were over by the halfway stage.
Well, last year there was 6 clubs. After 4 match days, there were 6 clubs who were qualified. Last year.
So that's why it's not why we know why they've changed it. It's more for more money and more more kind of glamour for the big clubs. But one thing we have to stress as well, that each competition, we've got the Conference League, the Europa League and the Champions League, will have their own separate week, won't they, where they can kind of showcase themselves.
Yeah, so they've done this to, like say, well, the backstory to this is they originally planned for the Champions League to be 10 games long. So this is why there was 10 weeks to it, and then of course there was the European Super League, and the backlash to that meant this was rediscussed, and they decided to make it 8 games, which left 2 spare midweeks. So then they decided to use the spare midweeks by giving 1 week each. So the first week in mid-September is Champions League only, then the week after is Europa League only, and then at the end of December the Conference League finishes as a standalone on the 19th of December. So they'll say that it's because they want to promote all these 3 competitions, when in essence it's because they originally planned it to be 10 games.
One thing as well that fans will be interested in is that we've said about how predictable these groups can be. Well, each big club will now get a big club in the group stage, won't they? So Man City could play Bayern Munich, or Real Madrid could play Liverpool. It's been set up so that there are no boring groups, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because people say, it means more meaningless games, when in essence, for the biggest teams, for your Liverpools, for your Real Madrids, your pot 1 teams, their extra games are effectively 2 games against teams in their own pot. So this is why the way UEFA's trying to create this sort of like marquee run of games where every single match day will have a Real Madrid versus PSG, a Liverpool versus Atletico Madrid. So there will be something every single week for UEFA to have a big fanfare about. I think another interesting thing about the scheduling, the fact it goes into January, and we're going to have to see exactly what happens here, but you could get some of these clubs who are in the middle ranking who have their players sold before the last 2 match days of play. So it could have an impact on how the group stage actually finishes. If these teams that have overperformed and are having their best players cherry picked, and they are cherry picked before the group stage finishes, then that could almost have an impact on exactly how the league phase will finish out. And some of these teams could maybe miss out on carrying on in Europe because they're losing players that they had at the start of the tournament.
So people are questioning whether these games will matter towards the end of the initial stage. So if a team is 13th playing 21st, why does it matter?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that UEFA really needed to tackle, because obviously if you're in the middle and you're virtually guaranteed to go through, then why would you want to play your full strength team? Same if you're in the top 8 and you think you're pretty much safe. So the way UEFA have done this is made every single position count. So your final league placing creates the knockout bracket. So in essence, there will be no draw as we saw in previous years, where it was basically all the balls going to the pot and you could draw anyone based on seeding. If you finish first or second, you will be in separate halves of the draw and you can't play each other until the final. If you finish third or fourth, you'll be separate halves of the draw and you can't play first or second until the semi-finals, and so on. And so it basically creates a tennis-style bracket and seeding, which keeps the best ranked teams apart as long as you go. Now, the only draws there will be to place these clubs in either half. For instance, positions 1 and 2 could be in the top or bottom. Same with 9 and 25. So they will be the 2 draws. So it's a very limited draw.
So basically, if you use the tennis analogy, so the top 2 want to be Djokovic and Alcaraz, don't they? Because they know that if Man City and Real Madrid finish top 2, they won't be into the final. There's no chance of a semi-final between those 2 clubs, which could scupper their hopes of winning it. So there is a value of being top of that group and second, because, like you say, it dictates the draw and it keeps them apart.
Yeah, exactly. If you say if you're in 4th or 5th and you don't take, say you're in 4th, so you can't beat first, second to the semi-final. If you don't take that last group league phase game seriously and you drop down to 8th, that means you're going to play. You could play the first or second place team in the quarterfinals. So it does matter, but how much will it matter? How much we won't know how much it will matter. We won't know how much they really care until we see that final league phase.
That's the key, because someone like Pep Guardiola, his big thing is obviously to qualify first, but wants to finish top of the group. Once you finish top of the group and you're guaranteed to finish top in the old format, he plays his kids and they get beat somewhere where they shouldn't. It'd be interesting to see if City, for example, they were 3rd in that in the big league, going into the final match day. They were guaranteed qualifying from the top 8, but they could finish top. Whether that would be enough of an incentive to say we're not going to see Real Madrid now until the final. Whether he would think I need to play a strong team in this final game, even though we're qualified, to make sure we finish in the top 2, so I don't meet Real Madrid, or whether he just reverts back to what he's done in the past and we've already qualified, we're going to play the kids, and if we lose, we lose, kind of thing.
So in the mock I did on the website, going into the final match day, the only teams that had essentially nothing to play for in terms of qualification were the top 2, which is Real Madrid and Manchester City, and the bottom 3, who were eliminated and couldn't make the playoffs. Everybody else could move within positions. There were 17 teams going for the other places in the top 8. There were 17 teams going for the last places in the knockout playoffs, and there wasn't one team that was guaranteed locked in the knockout playoffs. They could go all the way up into the top 8 or drop out of the top 16. Top 16. So that does show that there will be lots of movement. There are unlikely to be many teams that can really rest on their laurels. And like I said, with 18 games at the same time, it's going to be quite something to watch.
The bracket element has worked, hasn't it? In tournaments, you get, whether it's managers or fans, if you know where your route to the final, it becomes a thing, doesn't it? It's like Southgate resting players against Belgium and not finishing top, or whether finishing second in that group creates a better path to, a perceived better path to the final, where that brings an element of jeopardy to it that we haven't seen before. If there's just a normal draw going forward in the knockouts, and it's irrelevant, isn't it? But it's not now.
Dale, given that you understand this better than the rest of us combined, and probably everyone watching this, do you like this? Do you think this is a good idea, or is this a bit like when you get a board game on Christmas Day that's really complicated and no one understands the rules and they just throw the pieces in the fire? Or should we actually?
Is that a little impact to your Christmas?
Yeah. Don't come round mine. Or should we actually persevere with this, and once we understand the nuances and the complications of it, and probably live it for a year, that everyone will get on board with it and think this is a really great idea?
I think it's really easy to say change is not good, or we've had this old Champions League system for 21 years, you should stick with it. As Mark said, like, it does get quite stale towards the end of the group stage, and quite often the group stage had like only 2 or 3 groups that had anything riding on it. So we're going to have to see really just what it's like. It's going to be really strange, the fact that people don't have the reverse fixtures home and away, and there really could be some teams that get better fixture lists than others. So we're going to have to see just how it plays out, I think. But the jury is definitely out in terms of whether the fans think it's going to be this thing that they've never experienced before is going to be a winner.
I've got to say, me and Dale went to this briefing at the end of last season. I went in very sceptical, thinking, I'm not sure about this. It's so complicated. It is almost like...
You were sceptical going in?
Yeah, I know it's hard to believe, but I left kind of open-minded. But I must have, when you had the presentation, the video graphic, it did make sense, and I think it will be a good idea. But like Rob says, people are resistant to change. It's like managers want control. Well, it's kind of good if there's no control at some time, because that jeopardy, that difference will make it more interesting. I think fans will get on board, but it will take a season for it to seep into the consciousness, because all that we're hearing from fans is, doesn't make sense, it's going to be rubbish, we'll give it a chance. It's probably better than what it could have been, a Super League with no relegation, no promotion, nothing.
Fans will like the pot 1 games, won't they?
Yeah.
If you ever get the way and there's a marquee game every week, if you've got, I don't know, Real Madrid against City or something every single week, fans are going to love that.
Yeah, well, Man City's, they've had some not easy draws, but low key, low interest draws. They've not really had in the group stage big games, because they're the top seeds usually, and they've been getting kind of the easiest game in each pot, and the fans, why spend good money to watch Man City against, I don't know, Bromley or something? They're going to win. So if there is an element of jeopardy there, which Real Madrid or Atletico Madrid, Bayern Munich, it makes it much more interesting and sustains that Champions League jeopardy right through the season.
I do wonder whether one of the consequences of this will be in time that they expand the squad sizes. When you think about tournament football where it's gone from 23 to 26, and that was obviously because of COVID, but they've kept it, and the managers wanted to keep it, and those tournaments themselves have expanded. There's a bigger Euros, there's going to be a 48-team World Cup in 2 years. Whether the reality of this is going to be, I know it's only a couple more games now, but when we're talking about the intensity of the competition, and whether clubs are going to be, or managers are going to be under pressure every week to put out their strongest side, which is going to ask more of those top players, which means the managers are going to want more of those top players to be able to rotate, whether we are getting to a point where squad sizes are going to have to increase.
I think the point on that is about the January aspect, and the fact that this is January was normally the period into start of February when all the big clubs had a bit of a rest, even if they didn't have the full winter break like Germany had. You'd have a lot of FA Cup rounds, you'd have midweeks, which would just be the Carabao Cup, which really would only have a couple of clubs in it, if any of the big teams. So you'd have like that 6-week period where these teams would really have a bit of a sit back, whereas now they're going to have 2 crucial rounds of European games to play in the middle of this. And of course, in other years, you're going to have this taking place when the Cup of Nations has started, Africa Cup of Nations started, and the Asian Cup. So there are other aspects to the player burnout and the timing and everything, which is going to put extra weight and impact on.
So without increasing the squad sizes, what you're essentially doing then is probably, if we just take the Premier League as an example, you're bringing the clubs who are involved in that a little bit back to the pack, really, because those guys, the clubs outside the top 6, top 7 who are not involved in European competition are going to be having their feet up a little bit more, whereas those clubs are going to be asked more and more games, more and more, and without them being given more players and more resource to do that, bizarrely the knock-on effect might be that the Premier League or the domestic leagues might actually become more competitive as a result, because those players are going to be fatigued.
Well, you get into a ridiculous situation like when Bolton qualified for Europe. They had a fantastic Premier League season, qualified for Europe, rested their key players in Europe to win Premier League games to get them back into Europe, to rest players in Europe to play Premier League games to get back into Europe. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So the big question here, so Saturday the fixtures are released. Are you going to be monitoring the UEFA website? Are you going to be buying Oasis tickets?
Oasis tickets are the priority over the Champions League, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Dale.
Cheers, thanks a lot.
Well, the transfer window slams shut on Friday night at 11 o'clock. It's shaping up to be probably one of the livelier ones than we've seen in recent years. But guys, obviously, we've all been in the game a few years, probably got some stories about deadline days past. Who wants to tell a particularly interesting one?
I can go first. The messiest one that I can remember was United 2013, Fabio Contral, the famous Fellaini transfer window at United. They tried to sign Contral on loan from Real Madrid late on deadline day. Everything was signed, paperwork signed by Real Madrid, by Man United. Player got sent to the Premier League, which gave them an extra hour to actually do the deal. And then Real Madrid just stopped answering the phone. They just stopped responding to anything. They were trying to sign a left back who had chosen to go somewhere else. They thought we were getting a left back and ended up going somewhere else, so they wanted to keep Contral. It was so messy that there was just nothing. There was deadline day. Deadline came and went, passed. There was just nothing from United, nothing from Real Madrid. The Premier League went quiet as well. Even in the morning, it was so messy that the Premier League couldn't confirm one way or the other whether the deal had gone through. And it was only late the day after, like mid-afternoon, that they finally came back and said it's just not gone through. And United was still convinced that it had, and it just hadn't. The paperwork, the final bit of paperwork that they needed, just had never arrived. And Contral to stay in Madrid and never got to play for Man United, which just summed up that window for United and the Woodward era, really.
That kind of summed up the next 5 years, didn't it, really?
It did.
That was how it was. I mean, my memory is, it's probably the most famous deadline day. It was September 2008, and it started with Man City having just signed Pablo Zabaleta, and there was suggestions that Man City could be in trouble with their ownership because Thaksin Shinawatra was at the club and he had his assets frozen. He was the Thai Prime Minister, and it looked like City could be in a real mess. Then all of a sudden, about 9 o'clock in the morning, there was news that this mysterious consortium from Abu Dhabi was going to buy the club. And next thing you know, Chelsea's moved for Robinho. At the time, Chelsea were either the champions or they were certainly, obviously, a major player at the time under Abramovich. I think big club, big spending club. We're going to sign Robinho from Real Madrid. And then we heard that Man City were interested in Robinho. I was like, this sounds ridiculous. And at the same time, Man United were trying to get a deal done for Dimitar Berbatov at Tottenham. The Berbatov deal had gone on for weeks and weeks, and this is partly why Daniel Levy's got such a big reputation amongst Man United, at least, of being a hard bargain driver, because he just wouldn't agree to a deal for Berbatov. Daniel Levy then heard that Man City were interested in Berbatov, so the price went up. So for the next 2 or 3 hours, all this craziness is going on about Man City, and Dimitar Berbatov has still not left London. Then all of a sudden his plane takes off from London, and somebody at Man United told me was, when it took off, they didn't know if he was flying to sign for Man United or Man City, because they'd realised that this Man City takeover was serious.
Just Manchester, please.
He was going to Manchester, and they were fairly confident, but because they didn't trust Daniel Levy to be straight with them in terms of, they felt that Daniel Levy was aware of this money at Man City. He thought, right, this is my chance to get a massive deal for Berbatov, whether it's to Man City or to get more at Man United. So this is going on all day, and I think by about 6-7 o'clock at night, United realised that, thankfully for them, Berbatov is going to United, but he's costing about £4 million more than they'd agreed to, because City bumped up the price to the point where David Gill and Felix Ferguson basically had an agreement that they would never do a deal with Tottenham again on the back of that, because they felt that Daniel Levy had taken it so far to the line and ripped them off in many aspects. But while Berbatov signed for United, it was going dark. I remember the pictures of David Gill's office with the lights on at dark Old Trafford. Robinho was flying to the UK again. He felt, since been told in the years since, he thought he was going to Manchester, but he didn't know if he was going to Man United or Man City, because he hadn't heard of Man City at the time. And this sounds ridiculous, but Man City back in 2008, if you can put it in some context for fans now, imagine waking up on deadline day on Friday to hear that Liverpool are going to sign Kylian Mbappe, but Everton suddenly come in for him and Everton sign him. That was what it was like with Robinho signing for City ahead of Chelsea, because Man City were a club that had 35 years of nothingness, of being a bit of a joke, and now all of a sudden they were competing with Man United for Dimitar Berbatov. They were competing with Chelsea for Robinho and getting Robinho, and obviously that turned out not to be that successful of a move, but it was the British record signing at the time. Flipping back to Man United, because Daniel Levy had so much fun with United and City by playing them off against each other, he realised at 10 o'clock that he didn't have a striker, that he hadn't managed to factor in that if we're going to get rid of Dimitar Berbatov, we need to bring somebody in. So Fraser Campbell, who was a Man United youth team player at the time, played a couple of games for the first team, was driving to Hull to sign for Hull. When he suddenly gets a phone call from Man United, turn around, you're going to Tottenham, because that was the way out of it, that Daniel Levy realised that he needed to sign a player, and he signed Fraser Campbell. You might remember Fraser Campbell's time at Tottenham. Not many people would.
I think my deal would have to be Andre Arshavin, Zenit St Petersburg to Arsenal, February 2009. ran the whole window, but really kind of peaked right at the end. The clubs had been apart in their valuations. Zenit had wanted 15 million for the whole window. They'd not budged at any point. Arsenal had started at about half that, got to 10, got to 12, got to 13.8 million on January the 31st. The deadline was February the 1st. Now, the weather forecast for February the 1st was snowstorms like you've never seen in London. And the agent involved took a view that, well, we don't want the weather to scupper this deal, so let's get him on a plane, let's get him to London, let's get him here. And they did it all in secret. They kind of got him over here. They had a hotel, it was in Elstree, and they said to him, look, you're over here, you're not really supposed to be over here, but we didn't want the weather to ruin it. Just keep a low profile, just stay in the hotel overnight, don't worry about it. Next day, they get the papers in the morning. Andre Arshavin's on the back page of every newspaper, pictured in a bobble hat, texting on his mobile phone outside the hotel. All hell breaks loose. Zenit are saying, well, why is he over there? You've not got permission to have our player in your country. Arsenal don't really know where to take the deal from here. They catch a break, or all sides think they catch a break, when, because of the weather, the snow arrives. It's pandemonium trying to get across England, let alone trying to get flights in and out of the country. The Premier League decides to extend the deadline for another 24 hours, so February the 2nd is now the deadline. So on the morning of February the 2nd, the relations haven't thawed between the two clubs. Zenit are still annoyed. Arsenal are still saying, well, look, we don't really think we need to pay any more than 13.8 because the player's here, we kind of know we've turned his head. Eventually you're going to relent. It gets to 40 minutes before the deadline, and the agent involved says, okay, I can't handle this anymore, I'm going to put the 1.2 up. And he phones Zenit and he says, we're at 15, here's the 1.2. Zenit say, okay, we finally got there. The agent rings Ivan Gazidis, who's the chief executive of Arsenal, and says, I've offered them the 1.2 million. And there's a long pause on the phone, and Ivan says, okay. And the agent thinks, what does that mean? Does that mean, okay, we're paying it? Okay, I'm paying it? You know, he thinks he can get that money back in the commission that he'll make, but he's not sure. The email exchanges continue, and suddenly Arsenal are saying, okay, we're going to pay 50 million. So he thinks, phew, okay, I'm not now paying the 1.2. We've got over the line. But the story doesn't end there, because this was an era when the fax machine was still in play, and the Premier League wanted official hard copies. The fax machine there. The Premier League wanted official hard copies of the documents that said these two clubs have agreed to transfer this player. Except the Russians' fax machine was broken. So we're now into the final 5 minutes of the window, and a phone call is going from the agent to Zenit to say, right, just send an email to Ivan Gazidis that says, we agree to accept this amount for this player, and Ivan will reply and it will say agreed. Just put one word, agreed, and then we've got on official documentation or some sort of paper trail we can show that this agreement has been made before the deadline. And he's frantically refreshing his inbox, and 4 seconds before the deadline closes, this email arrives that says agreed. And that was the only reason that deal got done. And they were able to argue with the Premier League, okay, we don't have the official documentation, but look, we can show this deal was completed before the deadline. And that ended up being one of the key transfers that brought in the sort of official deal sheet that is still used today, where both clubs have to submit the information to a sort of centralised party, and it's all kind of uploaded and done like that. The last sort of thing about this, I think, to say is that after Arshavin had been left the hotel because it had been mobbed by Arsenal fans, he was staying at the house of the agent, and the agent's son was playing FIFA with him. And Arshavin loaded up the game and he started as Arsenal. He said, oh, this is my debut at the Emirates. The agent sort of said, I remember thinking that could have been as close as he ever got.
I mean, one thing that fans probably won't grasp is how much it changes on it. I mean, during the window, but during a deadline day. Because what could be right at 10 o'clock in the morning could be wrong at 11 o'clock. Because agents will put things out to try and move deals onto a different direction. They'll try and, sometimes misinformation is a killer on deadline day, because we're the kind of the messengers, but we're kind of carrying a message for people that have got different agendas, and it's very difficult. And I know that there's one story about when Tom Cleverley left Man United. I think it was 2014, and the club were getting mixed. Everton and Manchester United thought they were going to do a deal for Tom Cleverley, and Cleverley's agent was involved. So Cleverley at the time thought he was signing for Aston Villa. So he's driving down the M6, and Everton are speaking to Man United about getting a deal done for Cleverley. And Cleverley is then told, actually, you're going to Everton. So he turns back up the M6 to go to Everton. And then Everton chairman, I think it was Bill Kenwright at the time, rang Man United to say, look, we don't know anything about this because we haven't got the money to do the deal. So United felt that people in the Cleverley camp were playing towards a deal that they didn't want to do, and he had to then not reverse, obviously, figuratively speaking, another U-turn on the M6 back down to Aston Villa, with Roy Keane having been told that he's signing for Everton. So Cleverley, I think he tells his story himself, that Tom Cleverley had started the day a Man United player, thought he was going to Everton, then decided to go to Aston Villa, headed back to Everton, realised the Everton deal wasn't happening, then went to Aston Villa having told Roy Keane that, sorry Roy, I'm not signing for you, I'm signing for Everton. And then 2 weeks later after the international break, first day of training is Aston Villa, is there Roy Keane who's assistant manager at Paul Lambert, having thought that he was going to sign for somebody else. So that was quite an awkward situation for Tom Cleverley. But I think this is the transfer window is about 21 years old now. I think it came in 2002-03. And at the time I used to do a lot of Bolton press conferences and covering Bolton, and Sam Allardyce, the manager at the time, he loved the transfer window. And I think Sam, he was quite ahead of the game in lots of ways off the pitch as well. I think he obviously looks back at now and people think he's kind of old school, but at the time he was very kind of cutting edge. And he kind of set the benchmark for how deals were done. Not in a good way in the sense, because on the final day of the January window in 2003, Bolton brought in 2 players, Florent Leville and Pierre-Yves Andre from France. And Sam admitted he hadn't seen either of them play. He was just basically given the recommendation by scouts and agents, and it was like 3 or 4 hours to go in the window. Bolton put them both on a private jet. They flew to Bolton, signed for the club, and he hadn't seen them play. But his idea was that, look, we do it differently at Bolton. We've got connections all over the place, and I'm prepared to sign players who I've not seen. I think that happens a lot now. I think it happens a lot in the say so of agents, that this guy will do a job for you, and clubs sign them, and they just look at a piece of paper, check his data, and think, oh, that one works. But Big Sam at the time was prepared to sign players without seeing them.
It's like the Bebe one, isn't it? That the famous one with Man United. They plucked this guy out of nowhere that no one had ever heard of. And a few of the reporters, after he signed for 10.5 million, he got picked for a reserve team game at Altrincham. And there's about 2 reporters there watching this reserve team game. And people started to sort of smell a little bit of a rat when we saw him before the game. None of the players were on the pitch before the game. The coach was literally moving him into the positions on the pitch that he wanted him to stand during the game, and everyone was thinking, something's not right here. He played dreadfully, obviously, in this reserve team game. Everyone started to think this might be a massive mistake. 2 of us waiting in the corridor after this reserve team game at Altrincham, waiting to possibly speak to Bebe, not knowing that he didn't really speak very much English. He came over to speak. Someone said, what do you think about signing for Man United? And he said, leant into the dictaphones and went, I will be brilliant, and then walked off. And obviously never was.
Well, I think in the first press conference, Sir Alex Ferguson was asked about him, and he admitted he hadn't seen him play. I think he might have put that one on Carlos Queiroz in terms of being recommended him by somebody who'd seen him on YouTube, and don't sign a player on YouTube.
Well, there are instances where that the sort of internal miscommunication between maybe the chief execs or the recruitment arm of the club and the manager can lead to a breakdown. I remember in 2012, Anton Ferdinand, he was going to leave West Ham to join QPR, and Harry Redknapp had been driving that deal, but the clubs had just not got anywhere near a deal. It had got to deadline day. QPR knew they needed a centre back. So they rang the agent of Sebastian Bassong at Spurs and said, look, we've heard he's surplus to requirements, could we do a deal, is he interested? And they moved that deal along really quickly. And it was the afternoon deadline day. He trained that morning with his Spurs teammates, knew this deal was happening, got the message at the end of training, said goodbye to everyone, thanks very much for everything, to all the staff, and all the best, see you later, I'm moving clubs, here I go. And then, of course, Harry Redknapp gets wind that the club have organised this deal with Spurs for Bassong and says, I don't want him. So Bassong suddenly sat at home waiting, twitching by the phone. This is deadline day, the time's clicking down, he's not sure what's happening, where his future lies. Harry Redknapp rings up Anton Ferdinand and says, look, come on, I really want to get you to QPR, let's find a way to do this deal. They do the deal, and Bassong's completely, that deal is off, and he has to go back into Tottenham the next day and go, hi everyone, yeah, sorry, I'm still here. And and he spends the next 4 months trying to rebuild his career at a place where he thought he'd gone, and his head had, his head had been turned. And it does kind of raise that issue about, we sort of, we're talking lightly hear about these kind of stories, but these players are traded as commodities, but there is a human impact sometimes for these guys, and when they're left in limbo like this, and you are talking on a fundamental basis about someone changing their employer at the last minute, probably not of their own volition, and everything that comes with that, whether that's a house relocation or a financial change, it's it has a big impact on players' lives and literally can change from one day to the next.
There was an instance, I'm going to protect names for the dignity of the people involved, but an instance at a lower league club in England years ago where a manager had basically said to the squad, look, transfer window's open, but don't worry, we've done all our deals, this is the squad that I want to work with. And you have to remember, at that lower league level, this is people's, not just their livelihoods at stake, but it's, do you have to relocate an entire family? Do the kids need new schools? Have I got money to relocate to wherever I need to go? So a manager to say that to a squad is quite a big thing, because you can kind of relax. I've got a year at this club, it's time to settle. And so it is a big thing. So the players are sat in the dressing room thinking, okay, that's great. Manager walks out of the dressing room back to his office, which is across the car park. Lads are walking out across the car park to the training pitches to start training. Lad at the front picks up a piece of paper that's dropped out of the manager's pocket on the way to his office, opens it up, and in block capitals at the top of the paper it says transfer list, and half the squad are on it, and they're all crowding around looking, asking, am I on it, and half of them are on it. And while that was relatively funny at the time, the human aspect of that isn't funny, because there were players on there thinking, I've just bought a house near this club, I thought I was going to be here for a year, but now I'm on this list, and maybe I'm going to have to move to the south coast or up north. It's a huge deal, and it does get lost a little bit, the impact on players.
And a lot as well that people don't kind of factor in is how much sometimes transfers are driven by agents, because agents make so much money off the back of transfers. Now, I was told recently about a championship club that was looking at a player from a Premier League, not academy, but a player that was kind of in between the academy and the first team, so no real experience, and this championship club was quoted £250,000 by the agent to do the deal for a player that no Premier League experience, no real experience. And a club in the championship to have to pay that on top of a fee or the wages, it kind of gives you an example. If that is what agents are banking from a very, very low level transfer, what are they making from players in the Premier League or in La Liga? So sometimes players that might not want to move might be moved because their agents listen.
I know of an agent who a Premier League club from a few years ago was selling abroad, and actually it was a loan deal abroad to a club in Italy, and everything had been agreed, and this agent that had done a lot of business with that Premier League club in the past but was not involved in that deal at all, rang up the Premier League club and say, if you don't give me €50,000 for this deal, you're not going to get any of my players in future, and what's more, I might pull one or two of them,
absolutely,
the one that they're in, out of the club. And the club said, well, hang on a minute, you're holding us to ransom here, you've had absolutely nothing to do with this deal at any stage, and you want paying for it, and they ended up paying the money.
Well, agents' fees are published now, but they're not broken down individually in terms of like this happened for that player, which I think it would be an interesting exercise at times, because the money that goes out of the game for agents like that, and also clubs, like you say, they do feel like they're being blackmailed into a sense of, you have to use us to sign this player, otherwise you won't get this player or the better player further down the line. And I think it's a sad element of the game, but there is a lot of money that goes out of the game on players that you wouldn't even think about.
I would say is that I know that lots of people might be listening to this and thinking, agents are the devil, they shouldn't be involved in football at all, but there are other instances where they do really protect and look after players. So I'm sure we've all got stories of players who just do not know the best thing for themselves, as much as you'd like to think that a grown man can make a decision himself. Lots of these players don't have those expertise, and there are lots of instances where agents have really protected players and made sure that they are making the right move, or any money they're making is invested in the right way. So it does go both ways. And
the deregulation of the industry in 2016 was a big move, because what happened there was, you suddenly went from about 400, 500 licensed agents in the UK to about 2,000, and most of those were chances, and a lot of them were family members in a lot of cases, who think that they know the best for their boy or girl, and they think we can negotiate the best deal because we have the best interests of our family member at heart. But then they go into a boardroom and they're asked to look at a contract, and they've got no legal expertise whatsoever, or no ability to negotiate, or no awareness of the market value of the asset to be cynical about it, that they are representing. And that just leads to a situation where if you've not got an experienced agent, you can be exploited. One other element I think we should mention is the competition among agents, which has become, I think, very, very fierce, particularly the big agencies. I'm not going to name the player, but there is a player who demanded £1 million fee up front to sign with an agency because that agency was expected to facilitate a big money move. And he said, well, look, if you don't give us £1 million up front, we're going to go and sign with someone else who will go and do this deal. And that agency's paid that money. That's a huge outlay to pay, £1 million up front for a deal that you expect to happen, and there's no guarantee that you're going to make the money on the back end. But they felt it was a justified expenditure to have that player on their books.
It's a scary prospect, and obviously Friday brings the deadline. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more instances of deals that happen which people raise an eyebrow about, and I suppose in the years to come we'll find out what really happened.
So let's talk about England quickly ahead of Lee Carsley's first game. Interim manager, but is he going to put his own stamp on his squad, do you think?
Yeah, I think he will. I'm told that he's not necessarily a continuity candidate in the sense that of the squad that he'll pick. The biggest strength that Lee Carsley has to recommend him for this job is the relationship that he's got with the under-21s, and he won the under-21s Euro title last summer. It was the first time England had won it since 1984. And there are key members of that group who, some of them have gone on, Cole Palmer being probably the most obvious one, but Levi Colwill's been called up for the senior side, Jarrah Branthwaite has also been involved, but I think there are one or two others who are probably going to benefit from Lee Carsley being around, whether it's not this time but next time. He's got 4 fixtures. The FA have sort of stressed he is going to be in interim charge, not just for these 2 games coming up. So you're talking about people like Morgan Gibbs-White, who was a key part of that under-21 side. He scored the winner at Southampton, obviously, at the weekend. He scored the opening goal in the semi-final win against Israel at the under-21 championships. He's a player that Carsley likes a lot. I could see him, if he's not in now, being in maybe next month in October. Noni Madueke's another one. Obviously scored a hat-trick at Wolves last weekend. Really puts him in the shop window for that. He's another who's impressed, who's been sort of in and around the under-21 setup for quite a long period of time, but not made that step up when Gareth Southgate was there. And another one I'd probably suggest is James Trafford, the goalkeeper. England not only won that tournament, they didn't concede a goal in all 6 matches, and he was such an important member of that squad. He's currently at Burnley, although by the time this comes out, or certainly by the time the window closes, he might end up at Newcastle. They're certainly pushing to sign him. He was part of the bigger 33-man squad that Southgate called up before Euro 2024, but didn't make the cut for the final 26. So I think he's somebody who could be involved. I mean, someone like Curtis Jones is an interesting one. He's man of the match in the final, named in the team of the tournament, but he's not played for Liverpool this season because of a groin problem. But Arne Slot is sort of making positive noises about it being back for the weekend, so he could potentially be available.
So I've been told that Raheem Sterling's desperate to get back in the England squad, which is part of the reason why he wants out of Chelsea, but clearly he's not playing at Chelsea, so it'd be very unlikely for him to get in the squad. Marcus Rashford wasn't in the squad at the end of last season. Do you see a road back for either of those two?
And Grealish?
Well, I think that what he'll do is he'll look to the younger options that he's got. I don't think we're going to see a radical overhaul, but I don't think that he's going to reinvent the wheel here in terms of suddenly saying, well, has Raheem Sterling or Marcus Rashford done anything in what is a very formative stage of the season to suggest that they should be back in the setup? You'd argue no. So I can't really see it. Grealish, I think, was more of a personal choice from Southgate, so he's possible. But again, he's barely
got injured before the Community Shield and not really played.
Barely played, so you can't really see those 3 being in.
Are there any players following the Euros who could be the end of the road?
Well, Kyle Walker's probably the interesting one. I think he's 34 now. He made very positive noises during the tournament about carrying on, although Gareth Southgate's had to talk him into continuing for that tournament and even in Qatar. So
While Carsley will want to put his own mark on it and probably bring in one or two of the youngsters, he is going to need some older heads there. I mean, he hasn't worked with the likes of Declan Rice or Harry Kane, or you don't really want to lose all of these kind of experienced players and just fill it with kids. So, there are certainly some decisions to be made there as well, I think.
Before we talk about Lee Carsley and his prospects of getting the role full time, obviously Lee was a strong contender to get the Republic of Ireland job early last year when I think Stephen Kenny stepped down, because Lee was a Republic of Ireland international. He's got ancestry from I think it was his grandparents, so he played I think over 40 games for the Irish. Now I don't think there's going to be any issue with Lee Carsley going back to Dublin. I think we know that he's born in Birmingham, there's a long connection with the England team. Declan Rice and Jack Grealish, however, we do know that Declan Rice played I think 3 games full international for Ireland. Jack Grealish played under 21 level. That I've got friends in Ireland that I used to work with, and they tell me there's a lot of resentment and hostility towards certainly Declan Rice. So how do you expect the FA to handle the fact that Declan Rice could be going back to play in Dublin against a team that he used to play for and no longer does?
Well, there's not a lot they can do to some extent. I mean, it's just if he's called up, and you assume he will be if he's fit. I mean, I do think in Rice's situation, it's quite interesting to me that where Arsenal have recalled Declan Rice, Bukayo Saka, they got them in right at the start of the season, first game straight after the Euros. City sort of said to Walker and Stones, and I know Foden played the second half against Chelsea, but they sort of said to him, come back whenever you can. Rodri's obviously injured, but they're thinking about April, not about August, whereas Arsenal have sort of thought, right, no, we need these guys hit the ground running, do not give City any kind of head start in the season. And I think both of them, Rice and Saka, have shown a bit of fatigue as a result of that, understandably. He never takes Saka off, Arteta, and he has taken Saka off in those 2 games. And Rice, I think, I remember I just caught Rice's caught his image at full time as I was at Villa Park last weekend, and he was sort of hands on knees blowing out, sort of celebrating, but very much feeling the pace of it. It could be a game that tactically he could miss out. Does he need the hassle? Yeah. It's a Nations League match. Is it really that? Well,
it will be a hassle. I mean, I think we have to accept that he will be a target of a lot of hostility from the fans, and is it something that he needs? Is it something England need? It's a game that it's a Nations League game, but it is a big issue in Ireland that Ireland produced these players and they are taken away by England. They're both, obviously, Declan Rice and Jack Grealish are qualified to play for England. It's fine, no issue with that, but there's a sense that I think we see it in the game generally now, that a lot of players that can play for one country play for the bigger country, in the sense that the more powerful country, and I think that's the resentment with Rice and Grealish. But I think it's quite a long way in the rearview mirror now, because it's happened quite a while ago.
Yeah,
I know there's maybe a tentative attempt to look at Evan Ferguson's qualifications for England, but obviously he's committed to Ireland now. But it will be interesting. But in terms of Lee Carsley, I think we both know that the FA would ideally like to have a coach that's come through the system at St George's Park and is emblematic of their coaching qualifications, their coaching system. So that's why Carsley ahead of maybe Graham Potter. And I mean, I hear that Eddie Howe is still a strong contender, but I think maybe seeing what's happening at Newcastle and the 4 games that Carsley's in charge will buy them time to assess the situation at Newcastle, because although Eddie Howe started the season at Newcastle, they've got a change of regime behind the scenes. Amanda Staveley's left, as she was quite close to Eddie Howe in terms of the day-to-day running. Dan Ashworth left as well, the technical director. So I think Eddie Howe's got a bit of questions to answer in his head as to whether he is Newcastle's number 1 choice as he was under the previous regime. If he becomes available before the end of the year, that would change things with the FA, surely.
I don't think if you polled the England fans who were booing Southgate at the Euros and criticising him on social media, if you said to them at the time, well, Lee Carsley will be the replacement, I don't think they would have had the same reaction towards Gareth as they did in that tournament. He's got, I think, a lot of people to win over externally, maybe not so much internally. I mean, we obviously talk a lot about how Southgate managed the under-21s and it's the same kind of pathway. Obviously stepped up with the seniors, but he's not the first to do that.
He's a strong character, Lee Carsley. He will surprise people, media-wise and player-wise, that he can handle himself. So I don't think he's not an FA yes man. No,
but I mean, Howard Wilkinson has followed that path. Stuart Pearce has followed that path. It is well trodden, and the FA will argue that if you look at Scaloni at Argentina and De La Fuente at Spain, the last 2 tournament winners, they've effectively followed a similar path. No real senior major coaching experience, and yet they've been able to deliver on the biggest stages.
It was interesting in the summer away with United on tour in America that we got to speak to Tom Heaton, who was obviously part of Gareth Southgate's I don't know, was he part of the staff? He was a non-playing player essentially at the Euros, and we were speaking to him, and he said that he thinks that there's a good chance that those England fans who were booing Southgate may live to regret that the part that they played in Gareth stepping down, because you talk about, Lee Carsley's obviously qualified in terms of the under-20s and under-21s. You've got other candidates, Pochettino or Pep and things. Gareth Southgate created this team that just habitually qualified for tournaments and performed well in tournaments, and Tom Heaton was of the mind that it's entirely possible that in a year's time or 18 months that those same fans who really desperately wanted Gareth out will look back at that era and think, was that really the right choice?
I mean, I know you covered this in your piece at the end of the Euros, and I was speaking to somebody post-Euros, and they were quite close to people in the England setup, and they were saying, in terms of the squad, of just managing the squad, it was the worst tournament that they had under Southgate, in the sense that it was just, the mood was different. And my sense with Lee Carsley is, I don't think we have to worry about what the fans think, because they don't pick the team, they don't deal with the guy. I think it's got to be an FA thing, but he's also got to win over the players. And that England squad has got a lot of big time players that have won Premier Leagues, Champions Leagues, played for the biggest clubs in the world. Will they accept Lee Carsley? Now, that shouldn't even be a question, but that is the reality of the game, isn't it? That big players with big egos want to control situations. And I think, just one more name I'll chuck in there, Frank Lampard, despite his checkered managerial career, would have a better chance of managing some of the bigger egos because of his playing track record than Lee Carsley would.
Potentially. I mean, the expectation is very different as well. We were talking about, I think the FA would like history to repeat itself here. They look back at 2016 and think, Southgate had 4 games, England started to play well, the players seemed to like him, they gave him the gig. It's pretty clear from the statement when Gareth stepped down that they said, we have an interim option if we need it. They clearly had this in mind pretty much from the get-go, and I think there isn't a clear candidate. You can look at the options. You mentioned Lampard, but anybody who looked at his club manager level record will think, I'm not sure.
He only gets it because of his playing record that might impress the players in the dressing room. That's the only way you give it to Frank Lampard.
Yeah, it's Eddie Howe, you would say, is the leading English candidate based on what he's done in the Premier League, but he's going to be very hard to get out of Newcastle. Graham Potter's had the reputation until he got to Chelsea, and that has really knocked him back. Then you start looking at the overseas options, and Pochettino obviously now looks like he's going to the USMNT, but having an Argentine managing England was always going to be tricky. Pep Guardiola, could the FA really get him? Jurgen Klopp kind of distanced himself from it, and again is the whole idea of would it be acceptable for a German to manage the England national team? But I think because there's not a clear candidate, they can, and as you rightly say about the pathway at St George's Park, I think they look at someone like Carsley, who's been involved in the setup. I think he joined in 2015, so he's been part of it for 9 years. If he can hit the ground running with these 4 matches, and I think significantly if England are playing good football, because that was the only criticism left of Southgate, wasn't it? Was that the football wasn't great. The performances weren't particularly good, and that's predated the Euros. I mean, they didn't play well for quite a long time under Southgate. But anybody who watched a lot of the under-21s, particularly in their Euros in last year in 2023, the football was really good. It was really attacking, it was really dynamic. He managed to squeeze a lot of attacking players into a setup in the same way that, the challenge was asked of Gareth, can you do that? And many people felt he didn't do enough, even though they got to the final.
It's also a big thing to win a tournament, isn't it? Albeit an under-21, because if you speak to players and people around players, it's becoming more and more apparent that international football is not club football. It's completely different in the way that you handle players, in the way that you organise training, in the way that you handle camps. So I think if your club hire a manager, you can look back at that manager's past and have a fair idea of how well that manager is going to go at that club. I don't think that applies at all to international football anymore. I think it's a very, very specific job, and the fact that you've got Lee Carsley who has gone, and albeit with an under-21s, has gone and won a tournament, but shown he can handle that and manage that and get through it. I think probably the FA would put more emphasis on something like that than perhaps a club manager who's done more in club.
They will, and it comes back again to Mark's point about buy-in from the players, because that's kind of what you need. You need to understand tournament football and the tournament cycle, and you need the buy-in. And if you don't have the buy-in, you're dead. And my concern was always when Southgate left that the baby could go out with the bathwater here. That the sort of intangible buy-in, and yes, it was a difficult camp in the summer, but still they got to the final. He just about held it together. Is that if you, with those personalities, firstly, and secondly with the expectation that there is around that England team, because whoever manages that team going into 2026 is going to be expected to win the World Cup. There's no two ways about it. With the individual talent that England have got, that will be the benchmark that they're aiming for. You will not win that tournament if you don't have the buy-in from the players. You might not be a tactical genius, you might not have to be, but if the players are invested in it and you've got that tournament understanding, then maybe you've got half a chance.
I think the problem with these next 4 games is it's Republic of Ireland, Greece and Finland. Can you give somebody the job on the basis of what they do in those games?
Well, essentially it's lose-lose, isn't it? You win and you're meant to, you're losing. But
it's also like, I'm going to get criticised for this, but it's the level of performance. It's almost like judging the pre-season friendly, because these aren't the elite of the game. England will be expected to win these games quite comfortably. They're not playing Italy, Germany, Spain, France. They're playing teams that they tend to always beat. So how can you measure Lee Carsley's readiness or suitability for the job against that sort of level of opponent?
And it comes at a bad time of the year, really, when you think about the domestic calendar. You know, when you think about the expanded Champions League, the extra demands there, the fact that a lot of the players have not really had a proper break. The Premier League is more intense than it's ever been. If the demands on these players to then say, "Oh, there's a Nations League game,"
there are also 2 more breaks between now and Christmas. So essentially, you could say, "I'm gonna miss this one, but I might be back in for October or November." So it's not like I'm going to be out of this camp and I'm not going to see international football for 6 months because we don't play again until March.
And that comes back to, I think, to where we started, which is why I think he will go for not sort of, you know, manifestly dominant, but I think he will go for a lot of youngsters because they know he knows, they know him, he knows them. I remember Harvey Elliott, I think, was describing him as sort of an unbelievable manager. Anthony Gordon, I think he said he's one of the best man managers he's ever had. You know, they really love him. You know, there's a real kind of connection that he's got with them there, and I think he's going to need a nucleus of those players in this new squad to sort of say to them, maybe even to the more senior guys, well, look, this is the kind of connection we can generate, but you've got to come with me on the journey and not be half in or half out, because you know that's the road to failure.
Well, the World Cup qualifiers don't start until, I think, next March, so the FA have got plenty of time. But I think my hunch, I don't bet yours, is that Lee Carsley is going to be going to the United States as England manager. He's
the bookie's favourite for a reason. It's his to lose, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's his to lose. If England play well in these 4 games, and as I say, I really think the style of football is key, because that's the only thing that the fans could complain about under Southgate. The record was ridiculous. It was unprecedented in England's history, their consistency in tournament football. No manager, whoever succeeds him, obviously is going to get to test that for another 2 years. So the only thing you can really judge him on is it fun, and are the players enjoying it, and are they buying into it? And if they do, then it's his job.
Well, that's part of the problem with international football, isn't it? You're talking about creating a defined style of play that fans can look at and go, that's your style of play in a camp that's going to last a couple of days and 2 games. I mean, it's incredibly... Managing international teams, I think, is incredibly difficult. I think it's people underestimate how tough a gig that is, and I think maybe, as I said before, that Heaton said in the summer that people are going to maybe regret the way that Southgate, in a sense, was hounded out a little bit, because I don't think the way that he managed it and the results that he had, the way that he managed those big players was normal.
So we might as well end where we started by talking about Oasis now. I don't know if you realise that Wojciech Szczesny announced his retirement yesterday, the same day that Oasis announced their return to concerts. Wojciech Szczesny's, I can't even say his name. His kids are called Liam and Noella, is that right?
Yeah, it is right. I mean, I can't believe all the times I've spoken to him in mix zones when he was at Arsenal. I can't believe I never knew this or never discussed it with him. But it never came up. It was certainly something he didn't do that England trick of like dropping a load of song titles into an interview, which he could have given us the clue that he was a big Oasis fan all along.
We'd love to know what you want to know, and if you leave questions or comments at the bottom of this YouTube video, we'll try and answer as many as possible on the next episode of The Football Reporters.